Hello, I'm Ben Street. I'm an art historian. I'm very happy to be doing this series of talks for Masterpiece on materials, where each month I've selected a specific material to talk about. The first object I've chosen to talk about is one I have to confess that I'm not a specialist in. I often find that not being a specialist in a particular art object can be advantageous, because it means that when I go and see this particular object in the British Museum, I'm not overly clouded by what I already know. I found this object really compelling because I think it's beautiful and it's beautifully made, but also because of what it is. Also because of the fact that it is, in fact, a functional object. It is a bell. It is really, strictly speaking, one bell from a whole set of bells. This happens to be one that's been isolated and placed in the British Museum in a certain way. Now, if you've got an object that is functional, whose function is not just to be looked at, but actually to be moved in a certain way, in fact, to be struck in a certain way, it means that what you're missing when you look at it is a different way of interacting with it. I see the experience of hitting this bronze bell with a mallet, which would have been how it would have been originally struck. I see that as being part of its existence in the world and part of the way that it came to be useful within a particular kind of environment. If it is silenced, it's lost something. But what an amazing thing to think of the fact this is a bell made out of bronze. It's a bell from a set of bells, and it was made probably in the 5th century BCE. So it's an ancient object by anyone's definition. It's in fantastic condition considering its age and considering the fact that it had to be struck, but it was struck in quite a gentle way, struck by a mallet. So it was part of a whole group of different bells that were differently sized to create different kinds of pictures. So I think of it as being more like keys on a keyboard rather than like a single individual bell. It is covered with intricate design, and those intricate designs are laid out in this very logical way. You can see that there are these kind of strips or different kind of fields of incident where you have circles that kind of are interspersed with these frieze-like strips, and each one of those parts is decorated with images that often, not always, but almost always relate to creatures. So they're dragons or they're kind of mythical creatures. Even those little circles that are like bosses, those little circles are little curled up creatures. So it's like a kind of, it relates to a certain kind of spirituality that relates to these creatures, but it also relates to a kind of organic life. So it relates to something that goes beyond the kind of craftsmanship that actually produced it, to suggest something which is much more maybe ancient, that's much more mythic actually. At the top you can see that loop, which is where it would have been suspended from a frame alongside other similar bells, and the handles of that loop at the bottom of it are in the forms of these very kind of curving, complexly bodied curving dragons. So again, it's full of these kind of organic living creatures that have been sort of transformed into a kind of idea of design. Now, some of those designs were made using a mold. So those strips that you see between the bosses were made using a kind of mold would have been made that could be used in multiple times. What I come back to is not thinking about it in relation to its specific historical setting, to 5th century BC China, or indeed to its function as a bell among bells, something that would have been struck in a ceremonial context, so not struck all the time, not struck that often and with a great regularity. But I see it as being something which exists at an interesting hinterland between function and form. I also find it exciting because my frames of reference, which are, I have to confess, Western, fall short, which means that my ability to articulate an argument about it is kind of limited. But that's because, and as I'm speaking to you, I'm staring at it in a hypnotized kind of way. I find it a really hypnotizingly beautiful thing. And that, I think, can be enough for an object.